Hey everybody, Barry here again. I apologize if you can't hear anything I'm saying because it's insanely windy today. Like, that's not turned on. Anyway, so I'd like to start this video off a little bit different and just kind of do a roll call. A lot of new people coming on. Well, I know I'm not big, I have 750 subscribers, but it's really cool. And I'd kind of like to know where everybody's coming from because I checked the analytics and it says like 50% USA and that doesn't tell me anything. So if you like, wherever you're from, just comment it. It'd be kind of cool to know where everybody's from. I'm from a little small town in central Newfoundland called Lewisport on the east coast of Canada. And I know that doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but I'll start with me. So today I'm waiting on some steel so I can make the crossmember stuff up here and across the front of the rack and stuff. So I'm going to cut up a perfectly good oil pan for a sole purpose of making a diagram so I can make my own oil pan. What I'm going to do is take this pan and trim it around the perimeter and just use it, you know, to make my own sketch, my own diagram of the flange. And for that, I'm going to use this. I know steel is not the best material, it rusts and all that stuff, but trucks have been using steel oil pans for 100 years. And yes, they rust out over time, but this is probably not going to see salt anymore or snow, so it'll be fine. So here we go, 3/16 plate steel, nice and strong. Every bolt is like 4 inches apart anyway, so we're not worried about uneven clamping if they were like 6-8 inches apart or anything like that. This is what I'm going to use for the sump itself. This is, I think, 16 gauge, fairly thin, but still very strong. Like, it's really hard to bend. It'll weld really well. The reason I'm going to cut this up is because it's got all these low spots and high spots here that it's going to be really, really hard for me to draw out and try to make correct just by eye. So that way, when I cut off the top of this, I can get my pen in here, mark it really well, everything will be lined up perfectly. Of course, I could make this really, really easy and make it a lot faster by using an oil pan gasket for my template. But what happens if that gasket is just a little bit squish and then each bolt hole is out 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch because instead of it being perfectly squared, the corners are off by 5 degrees. And then we got a big mess because the flanges don't line up, the gaskets don't line up, the oil port holes don't line up. Rather not risk it. I got like 5 of these things from scrapping trucks. And this one, I don't actually have a sump for because probably throw it in a scrap pile or something. Anyway, so it's not much good to me anyway. Another thing while you're doing this is wear a respirator when you're cutting aluminum because it makes a lot of really harmful dust on your lungs and it can be a wicked irritant. Next day you'll be feeling like you got sinus infections and stuff and sneezing and it's just terrible. So wear a respirator. I'll see if I can find one. Also today I got a couple of parts come in. This is engine mounts. Both these are the same. This is 99 to I think 06 Chev truck. Engine mounts here. So here's where they would bolt to the block. Down here is where they bolt to the frame. I'll have to make up mounts for that. Part number is Anchor 2909. This is transmission mount for the same years. Anchor part number 2811. This is the one that has one stud on the bottom. Makes it a lot easier for drilling out plates and stuff. So it bolts up to the transmission right here on the tail shaft. And then this just goes down through a hole. Nut goes on it. Very simple. I did mention that I was going to do solid engine mounts and that I had no issue with it in the rat rod. But the rat rod was a separate frame and cab on rubber bushings, like or cab mounts. So I didn't have any vibration. It had a bit of noise and stuff, but I didn't mind that. But this thing is a unibody. And I'm going to be making my engine mounts to come off of this frame rail right here, which is part of the van. And I think I'm going to have a lot of problem with resonance going through the frame where it's directly a part of the frame and the cab, and I don't want to risk it. And for like 50 or 60 bucks that it was, I'd rather put mounts in it, and it'll be just that much easier to replace it when you take the engine out and put pistons in it. So it doesn't really fit over my beard that well. Well, by the time I realized the camera had shut off, it's after I had it done. So here we go. You saw what I was doing anyway. Got it cut off with the grinder, not straight, don't care. I didn't warp anything, it stayed nice and flat, we can see here. And now we can easily access the inside with a pen or marker to mark our template. There we go. Nice big piece of metal. And there we go. Easy. The next step is as simple as coloring it in. We just go around. Some spots I'm not going to be able to reach with a marker, but I'll fill them in after. Man, it's making some racket. I got the back lined up with the edge of the steel, just so there's one less cut that I have to make. Plasma cutter is tedious work, so the less that you have cut, the better. I've seen so many people do this on the truck shows and gears and all that stuff, and they're like perfect at it. I'm here coloring outside the lines. Ah, I moved it. Darn. There we go. And right here. And without moving it, go ahead and color in the inside. Or drawing or whatever. This makes it a lot easier than trying to guess where it's got to go. After you're done what you can get with the marker, just pull this up out of the way. And you can see here the spots that we couldn't get. It's pretty simple. Just color those in nice and straight. And not too serious, we got her pretty much colored in. So now we know exactly what our flange is going to look like. Now, as for these holes right here, being here, I have the shape of this, so I'll use a gasket in order to get these holes correct. I don't want to have them too big or too small because that'll mess up oil flow. And this one here doesn't matter, I'm not going to have a pressure relief valve on it. And these holes here, all the bolt holes, I'll mark those in after because I got to cut this out with the grinder and plasma cutter, and there's going to be enough heat go through this that it's probably going to burn off the paint anyway, or the marker. I'm going to try to take my time with it so I don't warp the flange, although I don't think there'll be any issues. And I got an old 6-liter block that before I go to welding the sump part, I'm going to bolt this flange onto the block, have it torqued down to spec, and then I'll weld in my metal so there's no chance of anything warping there. Well, we're doing good so far. Let's fire up the plasma cutter. Well, it's starting to look like something, and while it's not very pretty at the moment, I'm kind of shaky. I'm not real good with a plasma cutter. I'm going to go over it with the buffer wheel and the grinder and clean up these edges. It's not actually horrible, just could look a lot better. Didn't get a lot of heat in it. That's the nice thing about these small plasma cutters. We only got like 1/16 of an inch, probably 1/8 of an inch in a couple spots. where the heat went into the metal. Not concerned about it being warped or anything like that. I am going to clean it up because we got some little jagged edges and stuff like that. It's not going to hurt the gasket surface, but make it a little bit easier for me to weld. Well, I don't think that's too bad at all. I mean, it's obviously not as pretty. I got to clean it up some, but it's going to work perfect. Oh, that's an immense amount of work. Well, we got to cut out. Here we go. That looks a lot better. It's still pretty hot. Much better. I ground down all the edges here, but I didn't touch anywhere on the surface. That way I know for sure that I didn't grind right here more than over here or back here, and there's going to be, you know, wavy spots. There's none of that because I didn't touch it. All I did was ground off just the edges, say on a 45-degree angle like this, just to clean up and chamfer those edges. Like, it's not sharp at all. Everything's fine. Now I'll go ahead, lay this old oil pan piece down on, mark my holes, and drill them out. Well, let's get this lined up and drill some holes. Geez, that actually looks okay. Lines up really well everywhere. I'll make sure to get it lined up perfectly before I start drilling, but yeah, look at that. Good stuff. Mint. Here we go. All of our holes ready to be drilled. As far as I can tell, they're all marked in the center of the hole here, but we've got an M8 bolt and what looks to be about a 3/8 hole, so we got lots of room for a little bit of adjustment if we needed to move it, you know, wiggle it a little bit. And now that all of our pilot holes are drilled, we can start the painstaking process of making this into 3/8 holes. All of our holes drilled. Everything looks really good. Now I just have to cut out the 2 oil passage holes. So in order to get these 2 holes drilled correctly, I'm going to use a new gasket. I need to buy a new gasket for this anyway, because when I bolted on the old rusty oil pan, I used the old rusty oil pan gasket that leaks. So here we are. I'll lay this down in place, make sure all the bolt holes line up perfectly, and then I'll go ahead and mark these and then cut them out. Oh, I almost forgot. This is Felpro gasket, part number OS30693R. This is for the GM 6 liter, 6.2, 5.7, 5.3, 4.8, just about every LS engine besides the LS7, I guess. This is aluminum and rubber, so there's no risk of over torquing it, crushing the gasket, and I haven't had one of these leak before. Here we go. Lines up decently well. I got a couple holes I might have to elongate a little bit, but all in all, it looks pretty good. So now we can go ahead and mark these. And here we go again. Let's see how we did. Try to get all these lined up the best I can. Not terrible. Not terrible at all. The holes in the gasket are a lot bigger than the holes in the block and the oil pan. And we can see that if we move it over here, we got the same thing. Smaller hole in the pan itself than the gasket. So that gives us lots of wiggle room. If the hole is off center a little bit, it's not going to make a big difference. Let's put this back in that case. These two oil ports here are not going to be hooked up to the oil filter like it was on the original pan. Like the oil filter is not going to be spinning on right here. What we have is this relocation kit that I bought. I had this in one of my previous videos, but in case somebody didn't see, I'm going to have two ports either welded onto here or, you know, threaded in or whatever, but I think I might just weld two pieces of pipe on, barbed pipe. And what I'm going to have is this over on the frame rail somewhere. This is where the filter screws on here, and I'll just have two pieces of hose, like good high pressure, high heat hose, going to the oil pan. That way I can have my filter, like, say right there, and then it's just these two pieces of hose. Nothing to it. One thing I want to clarify really quick is why I cut up this oil pan in the first place. Watch this. You can see that even a brand new gasket has some flexibility to it this way, and you can see that it will warp. So I didn't want to chance it. Better off cutting up a plentiful truck pan than it is doing this twice. And here we have our oil pan flange completely finished. Now I'm going to cut this one off here because it's about 9:30. I got to work tomorrow, and I'm not quite ready to finish the oil pan yet. As soon as I get the steel for the cross member and all that stuff in order to move this rack ahead, when I get the rack moved ahead, I'm going to bolt in a test engine. I got an old 6 liter block. I'll bolt that in, get the engine mounts built, and then transmission bolted on, all that test fitted. And when I get the engine bolted in final, then I'll go ahead and make my oil pan. That way I can get as much oil pan as I can without using up too much space or without going too far below the cross member. So I'd rather make the oil pan sort of wide, like the Moroso pans do, than to go too low. So I can't build it over there on the bench and be sure that it's going to fit this. So that's going to pretty much finish her up for tonight. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good night.